Welcome boys and girls, Kostaltyn here with a discussion about some of the most overlooked campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Starting with Kostaltyn. Now these are campaigns that have functional legendary lords, regardless of where their race is at. Their lords are functional, their campaigns do work one way or another, though they may have certain features that are off-putting to certain people. But really, if we look at Kostaltyn, I'm sure if you were to ask the question on Reddit, who's the worst legendary lord, or if you were to do a poll on the subject of who's the worst legendary lord of Kislev, chances are, by a fairly overwhelming amount, the answer you would get is very likely Kostaltyn. And I don't think that's really an accurate representation of what his campaign has on offer. For starters, he is not the worst legendary lord of Kislev. That honor, if you will, goes to Katrin in quite a few different ways, because of skill line and campaign situations. See, Kostaltyn has a few key advantages in his campaign that do make him work. To be sure, he's nowhere near the same level as either Astankia or Borsursus, but he is not a complete waste of time and space. In fact, he can make his campaign work very, very well and actually destroy any of these opponents around him like Azazel and Fra very quickly, because you start close to them. And when you start close to a faction, a legendary lord faction, especially one that has scalability, look at Fraught, then you have the possibility of wiping out that threat before it becomes a really big problem, which is absolutely the case with Fraught. I know this because I've played in both single player quite a lot and in multiplayer against Fraught. Fraught has a certain scaling capability if you're playing him, or if the AI plays him, that makes him a fairly painful thing to deal with. So in any campaign in this area, the key to destroying Fraught is to deal with him as quickly as possible. Well, Kostaltyn can just prevent Fraught from taking a single settlement over here, besides having help it by just doing a bit of region trading. But even if you're not doing that, you can actually let him have Fort Strogov, or even trade it to him if you want to, in a campaign situation over here. So you're taking out his money, you're taking out his resources. You should fight these battles manually. But that is one advantage. Another advantage is that he has more points towards Orthodoxy than he has with Ice Court. Now, is again ideal to play Astankia or Borsursus, but the Orthodoxy is, genuinely speaking, in a Kislev campaign right now, far better than the Ice Court. You get things like campaign movement range, you get various economic benefits, construction cost reduction, gain growth in all provinces, resource buildings not having no construction costs, population surplus +1 for newly captured settlement, 100 devotion, and chaotic wasteland. So having a lot of points towards Orthodoxy does end up working quite well. And you do have that possibility of going quite a few tiers above with the Orthodoxy as opposed to the Ice Court. Like if you're playing Katrin, you still want to go for the Orthodoxy as opposed to Ice Court, but it's just that slower. Now, they didn't nerf him. He used to give Frenzy, now he just gives Rage to his entire army. It's still useful, to be sure, but obviously not as good. But his skill line is also phenomenal. Like, he can get all of these various blessings, if you will. So, Dash, Tor, Saliak. And then when we look at his skill line, he gets local recruitment capacity, greater tier difference, recruitment cost, so you can get a lot of troops fairly quickly, or once he gets this, he can get Patriarchs in all provinces. Only he and Borsursus actually start with the Patriarch, but he's just benefiting with that. He gets speed, charge bonus, immune to psychology to his army. He does get Unbreakable, which is not necessarily a big benefit, but he also gets Heroic Resilience for his entire army. So Kostaltyn is quite solid in a battle. But then you also look at things like, a greater tier difference, construction cost minus 20% for Orthodoxy buildings, and a 10% economic building benefit. Then you get 20% ward save for embedded Patriarchs. This is a pretty big deal because ward save for Patriarchs matters since Patriarchs are very squishy by default. And so giving them that kind of extra survivability means that they're more on the front line, they're doing more damage, they can be more useful. Then you get melee attack for Kisavai warriors, which are pretty good units for tier 1 units. Cossars, Kisavai dervishes, and horse archers. Not really too important, nor is the leadership benefit too important over there, so melee attack in some cases not too important. But for Kisavai warriors, it actually is, because Kisavai warriors are an amazing tier 1 unit that can hold the line in quite a few ways. And I will maintain this. In Warhammer 3, given the pacing of campaigns, having that kind of strong early game, which again Kostaltyn does have. He starts with 2 settlements, one of them is a tier 2 settlement. Even if you don't trade it away to the Druzina Enclave, even if you're not doing that, and the reason you may want to trade it away is literally just so you can confederate them, so you can get that tier 2 settlement back. But even if you don't trade it away, then you can get armor cossars fairly quickly, or you can get more patriarchs if you want to in this campaign. And also, Erengrad as a city is substantially better than Kislev City, simply because you're looking at Frost Maiden capacity over here. You are looking at Light War Sit-led recruitment at tier 3. Like, Prague and Erengrad are far better than Kislev, each of them. Like, both of them, substantially so. So you starting with Erengrad is a bigger advantage than Katrin. Like, Kislev is only really useful in a very long campaign. Kostaltyn is all about that early game aggression, that early game push. It can be a bit annoying getting Katrin involved in certain wars so you can gain supporters by fighting her enemies, but you can make it work. There's a few kinks here, but yeah, I do think Kostaltyn's campaign does work a lot better. Like, you can defeat Azazel after turn 1. Like, you can defeat Azazel on turn 2, turn 3. You can confederate the Brotherhood of the Bear over here, which is something Katrin can't really do in her campaign. All of these things are genuine advantages in a campaign that should not be really discounted over here, because they can give you that kind of advantage that you're looking for. And number 4, it is Alarielle, the Radiant of the High Elves. Alarielle is part of the Queen and the Crown DLC that was released back in Warhammer 2, and it is one of the least popular DLCs that Creative Assembly released. I think it's either this or Grim the Grave that generally end up at the bottom of any tier list of DLCs Creative Assembly released. Certainly, if you are to ask people's opinions in polls, this is the one they would vote down. There's many reasons for that. And to be sure, Alarielle's campaign was not really that great back in Warhammer 2. It was worth more confederating her than playing her. But that dynamic is quite very different in Warhammer 3. So let's consider what she actually does have going for her in her campaign. She starts with a special tier 2 settlement over here in the Gaian Vale, and she can recruit Dryads from turn 1. You kind of want to get rid of that because you don't need Dryads or Treekin in her campaign, and you kind of want the money over here in this campaign pretty quickly, but it is something that you can work with. Something else that's also pretty annoying is that she has the Defender of Wolf 1 mechanic, which means she's paying extra for construction early on in her campaign. Again, just a number of frustrations over here, but that frustration, which I'm sure a lot of people feel, doesn't mean Alarielle isn't strong. In fact, she is ridiculously good as a Legendary Lord, even if it's some frustrating bullshit that you do have to deal with during the course of this campaign. So first off, a very important thing, her victory conditions are just really sensical. You just have to wipe out 3 factions, one of which is going to be wiped out by Tyrion, the other one is your first enemy, and the third one is Nakari. So perfectly sensical victory conditions. If only Creative Assembly was doing this for every single Legendary Lord in the game. Tyrion wishes he had these victory conditions. That's the start, however, in her particular campaign over here. On top of that, she has a influence benefit, growth benefit, control benefit in every settlement she visits. So if I just, auto-resolve this over there, lose the Dryads, whatever. This settlement, after this turn, will gain this kind of benefit, Power of Nature. So every settlement she goes to visit, after one turn, after she leaves it, will gain that kind of benefit. There is a way to deal with the construction issue as well anyway, so you can use Administrator Archmages, which you should, by the way, if you're playing any High Elven campaign. Then she gets the Diplomacy benefit with Influence at Court if you're willing to use Influence to manipulate diplomatic relations between yourself or different factions. Crucially, she gets the Invocation of Lilith, so improved casting, magic item drops chance. She gets the greater invocation of Isha, and she gets hero capacity 2 with Handmaiden. So if we look at these invocations, we're getting 30% cooldown to all spells, channeling Spire, and magic item drop chance plus 50%. She has more items than all the other high elves. She also gets regeneration for Dryads, Treekin, and Treeman. Pretty big deal in that situation. Otherwise, the right of the invocation of Isha is similar. It's just that regeneration that she's getting extra compared to the other two. She also starts with Handmaiden. So she starts with a casualty replenishment hero, which is a pretty big deal. Then she gets a casualty replenishment hero through nobles after 2 turns, once she's finished constructing that. So she has 2 casualty replenishment heroes. This is a big deal for high elves because high elves have a pretty solid auto-resolve. The problem is casualties and replenishing those casualties. This is where Alarielle starts shining. But that's not all. She is focused on Sisters of Avalorn. And the way she's focused on that, she can recruit them faster than anyone else. Crucially, the structure she recruits them from also increases your Handmaiden capacity at tier 3. That in itself would be a pretty big deal, especially because you start with tier 2 settlement, so it's not that far off. But then we go into her special skill line. You get 2 choices over here, Blood and Fire or Tradition Dictates. Blood and Fire gives you some kind of combat benefits, but it's not worth it, especially when you're thinking about Tradition Dictates. You get 2 control in all provinces, 5% income from all buildings, diplomatic relations high elves, 10% construction for all buildings in a province, so kind of making up for the initial deficiency, and crucially, Handmaiden recruitment in all provinces and hero capacity. This is something you spend 2 points in. So you're looking at 2 Handmaiden capacity over here through the skill, and you also get the local recruitment duration for Sisters of 1 -1 turn and a corruption benefit in melee defense. She is crazy. And the reason Handmaidens are so crucial is because while all high elves can recruit them, they need to get to tier 4 in order to get them. The fact that Alarielle can get them at tier 3, well, let's just say her campaign... High elves are the kind of race that plays in a scaling way. Like, they become stronger the longer you play their campaign. In the case of Alarielle, she just has that scaling far more easily available. She can increase Handmaiden capacity in minor settlements. That's pretty important when you think about the severe limitations on hero capacity for high elves. But Handmaidens might genuinely be the most broken hero in Total War Warhammer 3, because each Handmaiden can do the following. Diplomatic relations with high elves, diplomatic relations with all factions, income from trade tariffs, 1 control, and control for high elves is economic benefits because of the way their economy works and more influence. So she already has a lot of powers from that, but it gets even better. She doesn't have a weapon quest item. That's because her weapon is the Sword of Cain. See, the Sword of Cain has a bunch of downsides that are associated with it. So you gain combat power, but you lose out in terms of control, you lose out in terms of diplomatic relations. But then you consider the fact that you're playing a campaign with a legendary lord that's specifically focused on improving diplomatic relations and control. And you kind of start understanding where I'm getting at with here. Alarielle is a biblical tide of death and destruction that very few people can compare against. She might not be the strongest combat lord, but she's got the Sword of Cain on a flying mount. She is not the best caster. She doesn't have the best skill line in the world, but what she has gives you so many combat benefits for a race that is already dominant in a lot of ways after a certain number of turns in a campaign. She just gets there faster, she gets it more reliably, and basically, while getting the Defender of Ulthuan to work in your favor is very frustrating to say the least, and something they should change, the absolute significant level of power makes it so that Alarielle's early game might be a bit frustrating, but her mid game and late game is almost unparalleled. Worth pointing out why I mentioned those victory conditions, because the high elf victory condition gives you hero capacity plus free to all heroes. So what I'm trying to say here is Alarielle has the most heroes of any high elf in the game. She can get the most influence, steadily influence, of all the high elves in the game. Aliphanar might get the significant benefit for every contract he has in a campaign. Sure, that's nice and all, but having a constant stream of influence in a campaign gives you a real power of scalability. That's actually Aliphanar's chief problem. He has a great early game, but he doesn't have the scalability. Alarielle does have that scalability. At number 3, we have Tenowin for the Cult of Sotek. Now, lizardmen are lizardmen in Warhammer 3. They have many issues, but as far as a lizardman legendary lord goes, from a pure faction strength level, Tenowin is just absolutely ridiculous on multiple fronts in a campaign. And there is something specific to his campaign that just elevates him compared to the others. So first off, you do have this prophecy of Sotek. It can give you some money. It unlocks different sacrifices. You do have that plus 200% upkeep for Saurus infantry and Temple Guard units. Though 200% upkeep early on in a campaign when you can't even recruit Saurus is not really too big of a problem. Especially because you can get to tier 2 extremely quickly, but that does start a global war between all Lizardmen factions and all Skaven factions, which is a bit of a problem. So think of it like kind of an early game crisis. The issue with it is that it breaks AI behavior of Lizardmen and Skaven factions, so it's not really ideal. But in terms of faction effects, you might be misled into thinking he's not necessarily that great. And to be fair, if we're looking at the special skill line, he does have a significant leadership fighting against Skaven, to the point that his units are pretty much unbreakable. Then he has a skill line with the promise of reconstruction, control, corruption, income in a local province. Although the control is global, as well as other things as well. Global recruitment, local recruitment capacity, all that. But that's not really what's substantial about the Tenowin. What is substantial is found in the sacrifices to Sotek, which is what I'm sure Creative Assembly used as a template for the new Skull Throne for Khorne. So what you get over here are a bunch of different buffs that you gain for sacrificial offerings. So you get things like armor, you get leadership for skinks, you get jungle swarm as an ability, you get casualty replenishment faction-wide 15%. That's pretty big even with casualty replenishment heroes, which Lizardmen do have. You have blessed units, global recruitment duration, random followers, random banner, things like unlocking powerful red-crested skink chief, all these kind of things. Crucially, you get that 15 growth to all provinces, 5 control to all provinces, plus 2 recruit rank beyond that. But really the key here is the random follower. The reason this is so ridiculous is, one, it's very easy to acquire this, to unlock this here, so it's relevant in the early game. And you can get the construction cost reduction follower. Now, you can always use Master Mason, of course, but this follower is faction-wide. So you're looking at the significant construction cost reduction, which is a pretty big deal for Lizardmen. See, the problem is because of how slow the jungle is, how much it slows you down in a campaign, as well as the inherent costs of buildings, being able to reduce that cost is an enormous advantage in any campaign, really. But especially in a campaign that's focused on that kind of jungle warfare. So, he's still a lizard, with all of the issues that come with being a lizard. But whereas Oxyatl has a really powerful campaign from the perspective of campaign movement, teleportation, etc., Tenowin has a really strong amount or huge amount of campaign power in terms of just like global benefits that will help him out. Because things like armor, things like casualty replenishment, things like construction costs do count quite a bit. And number 2 is Heinrich Kemmler of the Vampire Counts. To be certain, with the Vampire Counts, you do have a situation where Vlad and Isabella are far more popular than anyone else, especially against Manfred. Gorst's campaign is not popular because, while zombie stacks sound fun, in practice it's not really so much fun to use. But Kemmler is a necromancer, but he plays very differently compared to Gorst. Gorst is all about maximizing output with zombies, whereas Kemmler is just about flat out doing very well with raising the dead and having a very fun and dynamic campaign. To begin with, you do have a much better climate situation than many others, because you have mountain, you have wasteland, you have temperate. So that gives you a huge amount of the campaign map to work with, including the entire empire, the mountains surrounding the empire as well. And of course, You're looking at the Badlands, you're looking at the Darklands. Kemmler can really wander the world. Now, he is not a melee lord, and that can be a problem for the vampire counts because of the way that they play battles. But you do have replenishment of foreign territory, you have Lord of Undeath, so you can summon Krell. So you do have that melee capability with Krell. It's just not on the same level of the vampire stack that Vlad and Isabella have, especially Isabella. But the power is certainly there. You do have quest items, so you are going to get vision on various portions of the campaign map and a good amount of money, which pretty important early on. One of the issues Vlad and Isabella have is that they just don't have that kind of situation with regards to quest battles, and that, yes, that does end up hurting them. You can really make Krell far better, and you can also reduce the cost of raids dead by a fairly substantial amount in Kemmler's army. That's pretty powerful, and having that kind of magical capability while also still maintaining melee capability is pretty damn important. I would actually just get these two skills and then, yeah, go full-on magical skill tree with him, get special skill line, raise the dead, use Krell to beat the crap out of him while Kemmler unleashes a lot of different spells. Sure, focusing on the army sounds nice, but there's reasons why that's not necessarily the most important thing in the world. All the same, you do have a great deal of capability in this campaign, and one of the things to understand is while you do have to pretty much wipe Karl Franz out if you're looking for long campaign victory conditions, because Creative Assembly can't make that work, you don't have a short campaign victory condition opponent except Durfu, so if you want to ally Karl Franz or vassalize Karl Franz early on, you can ensure that happens. It's a great deal of campaign power from that perspective. It's also a much easier campaign than Vlad and Isabella. Well, I say easier from the perspective that if you're playing Vlad and Isabella, going for Zarnagrund early on is just very sensical. So that means fighting against a faction early on that can hard counter you. You don't have that. In fact, you hard counter the factions you're dealing with except Elspeth, and she's not really that much of a problem. Durfu, kind of, but just stick the vassals on them. They will handle that situation. So you do have a great deal of capability that shouldn't be underestimated. And I think it can be difficult at times to make mage lords work. The reason it's difficult to make mage lords work is because having that kind of melee capability in a legendary lord is pretty important. But you do have both magic and melee capability with Kemmler. There's only a handful of lords that do so, like Scrag, Drazif, for instance. It works different with Kemmler, but it does work. Finally, at number 1 is Crone Hellebron of the Dark Elves. In general, I think a lot of people overlook the Dark Elves and what they can have on offer in a campaign, like very strong early game roster of units, really powerful economy, really powerful flexibility on the campaign map, even if you're focused on naval aggression. But certainly the power that is on display in a Dark Elf campaign in general is pretty significant. Like things like instant construction, having availability of heroes, very, very significant. But then you have to talk about Hellebron, because she's obviously not as popular as Lokir or Malekith or Morathi, but she is absolutely very strong. And so, in a number of ways, she's actually much stronger than Malekith is. Because while Malekith has some very significant benefits, so does Hellebron. You look at Hellebron's campaign, you're looking at a situation of, oh, I'm just going to summon a Blood Voyage, which is a pretty powerful endgame army, or a powerful army that's going to go out and fight my foes, right? And it might drag you in certain wars that you don't want to be dragged in, but you don't have to fight those wars yourself. You don't have to engage in that if you don't want to. You're not forced to do so. She does have a number of issues, I would dare say, in her campaign, specifically that she doesn't start near a port, so the first port you can get is over here. That can be a bit of an issue in terms of getting a Black Arc, though to be clear, you can always use the right of a Black Arc, but it's just going to delay you a bit with respect to that. However, it is important to note that Hellebron's starting province is just ridiculously good. Like, you look at Hargonef, it you look at Hargonef province, it does have that buildup of various things like over there, like those landmarks. Maybe they should be a bit lower tier, sure. Though, considering how ridiculous Dark Elf growth is and their instant construction, doesn't matter as much as in the case of some other races. But you then also have two different resources over here. Morathi has a really good campaign situation as well, don't get me wrong. But Morathi also can't take Rond so quickly as Hellebron can. That's the real secret over here in this campaign. You have two provinces over here next to each other of 4 regions. In fact, one of the things I do when I'm playing a Malekith campaign is I always try and take Rond. Of course, it's not sensical for Malekith to declare war on Hellebron, but Hellebron can take Rond. Malekith won't do it. You can raise Valkia for this province, take it out. Yes, the orcs might show up to be a nuisance, orcs being orcs, but it is actually very sensical for you to try and race over here against Valkia to take Rond before she shows up there. And by the way, you can. Or take it slowly and fight Valkia later on. Regardless of what you do, it does work. You do get hero capacity for Death Hags, which is pretty significant. Casualties post-battle plus 25%. Again, very significant when we're looking at that situation. You do lose diplomatic relations with High Elves. Not that it matters, the aversion is very high, but you get leadership, weapon strength, and recruit rank. So she's all about invading Ulthuan in her campaign. If we look at her victory conditions, it's like wipe out Morathi. This is actually far more sensical than what Morathi's campaign victory condition is, right? I mean, you can always confederate her if you want to. Good luck with that. But really, this victory condition is far more sensical because you deal with the situation over here in the north, and then you just go south, conquering territory along the way until you meet Morathi, deal with her, and then you invade Ulthuan. Or you could just invade Ulthuan first and then deal with Morathi later if you don't care about completing that victory condition as quickly as possible. See, Morathi's campaign victory condition is just bizarre from the perspective of like, oh, go deal with Hargonef. Morathi doesn't care about Hellebron and the lore. Like, yeah, she's trying to keep her down, but she's not her priority, really. She has far bigger ones. Then we also got to talk like she gets an upkeep benefit for Witch Elves, Sisters of Slaughter, Hargonef Executioners, Weapon Strength, all kinds of different benefits over here in the campaign, loyalty, recruit rank. For a while, I think Hellebron was dominating the multiplayer for Dark Elves. She was the best, but she has regeneration, hit points, and yeah, more unit rank for the Death Knight army. But when you look at the Blood Queen meter over here, yes, you do have penalties. So God forbid you actually have to go out there and do stuff. Look, this is very, very easy to do. And only when you get to Crone do you actually care about like the penalties. So until you get there, it's pretty damn easy to maintain. It's like in a Dark Elven campaign, you can get so many slaves fairly easily, especially if you bump up the difficulty. Crucially, you get Perfect Vigor for a bunch of units, physical resistance for a bunch of units, including herself, as well as Death Hags and Knight Assassins. Now, think of what this does in a campaign, like leadership, control, physical resistance, perfect vigor. It is ridiculously good. While it's not as good as on Joyous, it's still some physical resistance, vigor loss reduction. She also has that, like, basically, her armies are damn near unbreakable. And if you focus on these units are squishy inherently, so she's giving them that significant boost in terms of survivability. I think she actually has the best melee army of the Dark Elves, though she's also capable of cranking up a lot of Dark Shards. If I'm conquering this area of the campaign map against the Dark Elves, I'm not afraid of freaking Malekith. Morathi is, obviously in her own little corner, in her own little universe. So really the main threat that happens when you're trying to deal with the Dark Elves actually ends up being Hellebron. Because she will just spam endless armies of freaking Dark Shards, and or Witch Elves, or a combination of the two of them. And let me tell you, when you have that kind of capability, when you're dealing with Dark Shards that are damn near freaking unbreakable from a leadership perspective, it is pretty scary, I'm not gonna lie. And of course, you can get regular Dark Shards with Shields recruitment from turn 1. because of the instant construction, you can get 2 masters very quickly in a campaign, like from turn 1. You start with the Death Hag, you can get more of them. Like, having extra hero capacity for your casualty replenishment hero, even for a race like Dark Elves who increase capacity very quickly, I just need a tier 3 settlement. Even for a race like Dark Elves, that is pretty substantial. It just means you can recover from a lot of battles very quickly compared to what other races can do. Hellebron is unpopular or overlooked because she's part of one of the least popular DLCs that was released for Warhammer 2, and one of the last DLCs, or one of the last bad DLCs that CA released. Bad in the sense of the way they were handling content, not handling racial reworks, what they were having on offer. Hilariously enough, the last of the bad DLCs that CA released was Prophet and Warlock. You can talk about Shadows of Change, but you look at Prophet and Warlock, it's not a great DLC. It has a great Legendary Lord, it has a good amount of power, but it doesn't contain substantive changes for either Lizardmen or Skaven, which is fine for Skaven because Skaven are an amazing race, but not so fine for Lizardmen. And also it contains stuff for Skaven that should have been there, Rallying Gunners and Giselle should have been there at launch, so it's that level of frustration. But Queen and Crown is far less popular, in particular because Hellebron and Alarielle, who is also part of this DLC, they might have great campaigns now. But they didn't have great campaigns in Warhammer 2. Worth saying. Kostaltyn signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.